Welcome, and thank you for taking this online registered child and youth worker core training. My name is Langdon, and I serve as the Youth Ministry Specialist for the Greater Pacific Northwest USA Mission Center for Community of Christ. Our training here is going to take place over several sections. I would encourage you to find a pad of paper and a pen or a pencil for which you can take notes, as you will need to complete a quiz to get credit for taking this course, which is especially important if you're applying to become a registered child and youth worker with Community of Christ. If you need to pause the video at this time to go find a pad of paper and pen or pencil, go ahead and do that and then resume. To begin our training, let's go ahead and pause for a word of prayer at this time. Let us pray. O Holy Divine, we pause in the space that we are in and ask that we be open and pray that we be open to recognizing the Holy Spirit that is already at work around us and through us. May our minds and our hearts be open to receiving the knowledge that is passed on throughout this training experience. It is my hope and prayer that everyone, no matter how experienced they are or whether they are new in working in this arena of ministry, that we are able to take away from this experience a nugget of information that might be new or something we haven't heard in a while, so it's good to be reminded of. We are blessed to be able to engage in this kind of ministry as we prepare for it this time. And we thank you for the invitation to serve. In Jesus Christ's name I pray, amen. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin the overview section of this training experience. I'm just gonna pull over my notes here. So let's go over a few goals, just to review it briefly for goals that we have for the training. So first, of course, we want to just go through the process and affirm it. The process that we have that is to protect you as the children and youth worker, the faith community of Christ, as well as, of course, primarily the ones that we are serving, the children and youth that are in our communities, in our congregations, in our families, are the friends that we invite, that our kids invite to come to share in ministry with us. We're going to look at just some basic foundational principles that are the reasons why we have this registration process and why it's important. We're going to have a section that increases our awareness of the symptoms and consequences of child abuse. We're going to look at mandatory reporting guidance. It's important that we are all aware that as registered child and youth workers, we are mandatory reporters, and there are guidelines that we need to follow if we witness or suspect or are told abuse of our younger population. We're going to look at some best practices and policies that are related to the transportation of children and youth, whether it be during a ministry event or helping parents by driving them to and from the ministry event. And then we're going to also refer to the Community of Christ Privacy Code of Conduct, which is really important for you to read and understand as well. And we're going to have some scenarios and just some other things along the way as well to help us become better equipped and prepared as we offer this kind of ministry in our life. So let's go ahead and move into the first section, which is the foundation for this training. Some context for us is that we know that allegations of abuse are prevalent in our society. That's just one of those harsh realities that we hate and that we never want, especially our vulnerable populations, to have to experience this. But we know that it is a reality. And even within our own faith movement, we know that there are people who have experienced abuse. We know that we might have people that commit the abuse who are within our community as well. That's just statistically a reality for any faith community. So therefore, we have standards that are in place because protecting our children and youth is not optional. This is part of who we are. This is part of our core. This is part of our DNA. That it's important that we recognize that when we bring ministry to people, especially the youngest among us, there are going to be some boundaries and guidelines in place so that we can best provide that ministry and help reduce maybe the things in their life that might make them susceptible to experience some of the harsh stuff that we're talking about. So as part of that, we have some enduring principles in Community of Christ that are really important to the fabric of who we are. They are these things that are characteristics of Community of Christ and as part of our identity as disciples. And so that is that we believe in the worth of all persons, that there is nobody that God doesn't love. And there is nobody that the ministry of Jesus Christ isn't for. And so because of that, we're all of worth. We believe in the blessings of community, that when we gather together, when we are together, we are stronger because of that. And life happens in community. The pursuit of peace, because this is a peace and justice faith community. And our principles and our information and why we do this is a peace and justice cause for us. And therefore, we are called to make responsible choices in our life, especially when engaging in children and youth ministry. Making those responsible choices helps what we call as reducing the risk. We're always looking at ways in ministry with children and youth to how can we reduce the risk in this situation. Risk can never be eliminated, but what can we do to reduce it? And when we make responsible choices, we are doing just that. We are helping reduce the risk. So all of this is important to our life experience as disciples and as youth workers, and therefore really as youth ministers, as those that are offering ministry in this capacity. The most vulnerable in our society have the right to fulfill their potential. And therefore everyone, all of us have a responsibility to protect them and to make sure that they're being protected and they're cared for. It takes a village really is a thing in youth ministry, right? Like we are all in this together. That's that blessings of community thing that we just focused on. And again, pursuit of peace. We promote social justice. We are living out the social justice message of Jesus Christ when we live out what is in our child and youth protection policy. And therefore, the child and the youth, they always come first. They are our focus. They are why we do what we do and why we follow these guidelines. But the procedures are also there to protect you. So therefore, if we follow them, if we take them seriously, if we adhere to them, we are protecting us as the youth worker as well. And we're protecting the church. First and foremost, the child and youth. But also, we can't provide that ministry unless we're also taking care of ourselves and looking after ourselves as well. And so we need to make sure that we follow these guidelines so that all are taken care of. Now, let's look at a word about ourselves. Let's look at our own inward a little bit here and recognize that throughout this training, there's going to be knowledge that's passed on that could affect you in a personal way. It can be upsetting for you because it can be uncomfortable. And maybe it causes you to think about things that you had not thought about in a while. Maybe you yourself are a survivor of abuse, or you know somebody who has survived abuse. Or maybe you just know somebody that has been harmed severely so and hasn't survived abuse. And so we need to confront this about ourselves and be honest with ourselves about this, because as we take this training, we recognize that it may open some things and you may need to talk with somebody about that. And so I hope that if this training does unearth some things for you, that you are open to talking with somebody who is an appropriate person in your life, somebody who's licensed maybe, who can share in that with you and listen to you. It also can confront parenting styles. There's a section that when we talk about stuff that maybe it makes parents a little uncomfortable because it causes them to think about how they've disciplined their child and youth, either currently or in the past. So it's important to be aware of these things as we move forward. So we're going to look at 4 principles that are especially just fundamental to the core of our child and youth worker registration process. So we have education. That is what you are doing right now. It is why you're learning the facts, you're understanding them, you're understanding why we do this. We're going to look at the different types of abuse and how to respond with mandatory reporting, just other things that you need to know. It also, again, remember, this offers protection for you. It gives you permission to act appropriately. It gives you permission to ask for support. And therefore, when you follow these in a robust way and you adhere to the principles and to the procedures, it protects you from false allegations as well. Number 2, it's a child and youth worker application form. So you're going to make sure that you get a form at the end of this training. That my contact information is going to be there. So if you don't know where to find it, please reach out to me and I'll be more than happy to pass on to you a copy of the application form. There'll be signatures that you need. If you're under 18, you'll need, of course, apparently our legal guardian to sign it as well. There's going to be interviews with you. You're going to give some references and we're going to interview those references. And you need to be involved with Community Christ in some way for 6 months or more before applying. And if you're not sure if you qualify for that 6-month rule, you just need to talk to one of your pastors, talk to myself, and we'll discuss that to see if you would qualify under our guidelines. It's important to know that also when you take this training, that you have a year to then apply to become a registered child and youth worker. If you wait more than a year, we're going to ask that you please take this training over again and fill out the quiz again before we can process your application. So please be mindful of that. If you when you fill out the paperwork, you will need to make sure that it is processed within 6 months of you signing and dating the paperwork as well. So please make sure you're aware of that. With this part as well, interview the references. The references cannot be related to you. So make sure that you do not use references of those that are related to you. You also try to avoid references that are related to your pastor or the person who's going to do the interviews in your congregation. Because if they are, they will need to find somebody else to do those interviews. So just be mindful of who you select as references to make sure it's going to work for you and for the congregational leadership who is processing this as well. So it goes at the congregational level. Your registration form does. They'll send it to those of us at the mission center level, and then once if we approve it here, so everything looks good, we'll send it to the Office of General Counsel, which is our legal office with our Community of Christ International headquarters. Once it is finalized and entered into our church's database, the Mission Center president will be notified, and then you will also be notified as well that it has been approved. And if it hasn't been approved, then we'll discuss that with you as well. So let's look at some ways that we can minimize the opportunity for harm. There is a 2x2 rule. So that means that a 2x2 rule is that no youth worker can be alone behind closed doors with a child. There must always be at least 2 or more registered children and youth workers with 2 or more children in the same space, in the same enclosed space. So that's something that we need to be very mindful of and aware of. A youth worker assistant, just so you know, are those between the ages of 15 to 20 years of age. So you can't apply to become a youth worker until you're 15 years old. And then you are a youth worker assistant until you turn 21. And when you turn 21, you automatically become a full-fledged registered child and youth worker with Community of Christ. But until then, you're an assistant. And so for the 2x2 rule, well, you are never bringing ministry to people that are in your same age group. So you need to be a minimum of 3 years older than the oldest youth and that you're bringing ministry to. We prefer 5 years age difference though. And so that means a high school kid is not going to be a youth worker for another high school kid. That doesn't work. But if you have 2x2, it could be at least, you need to have at least one of those be somebody who is a full-fledged youth worker who's 21 years of age or older. And then the other one can be an assistant as long as who they're bringing ministry to is not in their age group as well. And again, 2x2 rule as well. Making sure that you never go to an isolated place with youth, making sure that if you don't have 2x2 for some reason, again, we're always reducing the risk. So making sure that you keep the classroom doors open, for example, and maybe you'll have somebody come and check to see that everything is going on okay. Every once in a while, just do random check-ins with the doors always open. Keeping the windows, installing windows in the doors of classrooms doesn't necessarily take care of this rule because though we can see, we can't hear. And there needs to be able to have, again, transparency with what's going on. So just be mindful of that if you can't have 2x2. And when you can't have 2x2, you have a visual one-on-one, and that's where some of this comes into play. You need to make sure that you're in a space where you can be seen by other youth workers, even if they're not there with you, right? So it doesn't mean that you have to necessarily be fully heard, but if you need to at least be seen on one-on-one. So if a kid wants to talk to you privately, which is going to happen because you're in ministry, you need to be at a place that others can see you. Maybe it's at a table at the other end of the fellowship hall, or maybe you're at a camp and it's going to be just at a bench on a pathway that's open, others can see you, stuff like that. And make sure that you're always preparing and planning so that no matter where you are, you can help reduce the risk, make responsible choices, know your surroundings, and change course if need be. So for example, let's say a kid wants to talk to you and so you go to a bench that's nearby, and all of a sudden as you're talking to them, you realize that there's nobody around. The people that you thought were around and kind of your eyes from a distance, all of a sudden they've left the area. So typically in that situation, if I'm talking to a kid at a camp, for example, at one of our campgrounds, I will then say, hey, let's go for a walk. And we'll get up and we'll just walk around the campground, and I'll walk to an area where others can see us. So in that way, I'm not really alarming the kid as to why that's happening, but I am following as much as possible, reducing the risk to follow our visual one-on-one guidelines. Again, we're always preparing and planning, looking at our surroundings, making sure that we're always aware. Plus, if you're talking to a kid, if a kid wants to talk to you privately, confidentially anyways, you also want to be preparing and planning because you want to make sure that other kids aren't within, earshot as well, because obviously they probably don't want the other kids to hear maybe personal information that they might have to share with you as well. So just be, again, mindful of all that. You should never be alone behind closed doors. We make sure that we have co-ed, since all of our activities tend to be co-ed, we make sure that we have co-ed leadership as well, that that we don't just have one gender, but more than one gender who is providing ministry, so that we just have that diversity. If we're having overnight events, then we need to make sure, and there's going to be multiple genders at the overnight event, then we need to make sure that we also have that represented by those who staff our ministries as well. How do we safeguard our children, youth, and community of Christ? Well, anyone working with children or youth in any church program, whether they be a youth leader, a Sunday school teacher, camp cook, a camp medic, a camp counselor, no matter what their role is, whether they're just helping out in a classroom on a Sunday or not, whatever it might be, they must be a registered child and youth worker. It doesn't matter what role they have in youth ministry. If they are interacting with youth in some capacity, they need to be registered with the church as a child and youth worker. That includes even if they, camp medics or medics and teachers and those, in our society that have a lot of training and have taken a lot of youth worker protection training because of their job, they still need to become registered with us as well. That's part of the safeguards that we have in our ministry. anybody who serves an ordained ministry, all of our priesthood, they need to be a registered child and youth worker as well. And they should become registered before they are called to ministry, before they are ordained in ministry, sorry. And if they're already serving in ministry and not registered, then we should be working with them to try to get that to happen. And if they are called to a new office, they shouldn't be ordained until they have taken this training and becoming registered as well. So again, some more, again, I already said this, but I want to stress it again. A registered child and youth worker assistant are those that are age 15 to 20 years old, and they would take the same training, online training that anybody else would take, and they work under the supervision of someone who is a registered child and youth worker 21 years of age and older. So you can never have 2 youth worker assistants together working and qualify as the 2-by-2 policy, right? There has to always be somebody who is 21 years of age and older as a youth worker who is working with the assistant when bringing ministry for it to follow the guidelines. And again, let's remember that we have the enduring principles to live out, and we need to be doing that and focus on that. Again, no one should ever be alone with a child or youth behind closed doors. No adult should ever be alone. That is not appropriate and not something that we should be doing. We need to make sure that we have respect for the child. So that means that we respect their privacy. Particularly, this is at camps, like in the showers area, making sure that that their privacy is respected. A lot of our campgrounds now have separate shower changing areas within the showers, so that's good. Maybe they'll set up certain times so that staff showered out and the youth can shower at this time, and that way they're never in the same, the stalls at the same time. Just stuff like that. How can we reduce the risk and respect the child's privacy at all times? Make sure that we're dressing appropriately. And this just doesn't, mean clothes that maybe reveal too much. Though we never want to, body shame in our youth ministries as well. So let's be mindful of that and how we handle conversations. But it may include what is on the clothes that we wear, right? And so political candidates wearing shirts that promote political candidates or political parties is not appropriate when we are providing youth ministry. It really is not appropriate in the life, bring those into church-sponsored activities anyways, right? Now, it could be that our clothing promotes social justice causes, and so just be mindful of, is this a cause that Community of Christ would be aligned with? And then that's a different, we're not talking about social justice causes here, we're talking about partisan politics that we need to be mindful of not wearing clothes, buttons, that whatever it might be that promote that. Really just making sure that what are we wearing? Does it promote the worth of all people? We're passionate about the worth of all people as a social justice cause for Jesus Christ. And so is what we're wearing, affirming that. Also, making sure that we aren't wearing any clothing that promotes alcohol or cigarettes or marijuana or other drugs and stuff like that. Here in the Northwest, it's very easy to buy hats and clothes that have brewery symbols on it, that marijuana leaves, stuff like that we may not even realize or think about the fact that it's there. But we need to be mindful that what we are wearing to youth ministries doesn't promote in any way the use of those kind of substances. And so being mindful that the clothing that we pack is appropriate. Constructive discipline. So no corporal punishment in Community of Christ. We'll talk about that in a little bit more later, but just making sure that any discipline that we have is constructive, making sure that we're not trying to, when children and youth are with us, it's not our job to be punitive in our actions in response to what they do. Our job is to offer transformational ministry. And so therefore, how could we discipline when needed children and youth at our functions in a way that is constructive, in a way that they learn from it. It's important that we don't call them out, like we don't do any kind of discipline where it would put them on the spot in front of others, because that diminishes their worth as well. And though they may have done something that was disrespectful and not appropriate, they don't deserve to have their worth diminished when disciplining. So just be mindful of that. Know your audience, know what's going on there, and know who you're working with. And yes, that does mean that at times it's going to be different disciplining for different youth, because not every children and youth is the same. And so think in advance of your ministry, maybe as a staff, have conversations about that, how you're going to handle that. And really, it should be the leader probably that addresses those concerns. And so if that needs to happen, talk to the leader that's there and discuss it. Making sure that we have appropriate touching as well. So this is a kind of a hard for us, because what we're also talking about here is what could be perceived as inappropriate touch by others. And so, you know, in Community of Christ, we kind of consider everybody family. Like we love each other. Hugs are always prevalent, but when it comes to youth ministries, we really want the child or youth to initiate any of that kind of stuff. So maybe don't go and just initially hug all of them. Maybe see how they respond, and they'll initiate the hug if they want one. Or maybe you're going to give them a fist bump, or maybe you're going to give them a side hug as a way to reduce the risk. I liked on Facebook, I saw this one time where this teacher had a sign on their door that said, you know, how do you want to be greeted today? And the kid knew that whatever was on the wall, whatever symbol on the wall that they high-fived, that they touched, was going to be how the teacher was going to greet them. So for some it was a hug, for some it was a high five, for some it was a fist bump, for some they just did this moment of dance to introduce themselves, to greet each other, and then they went along their day. How can we do interact in a way that's appropriate and that gives the child space to be the one to initiate how they interact with you in that way? We want to give them consent of all kinds, right? And so this is a way of letting them, you know, provide the consent for how you are introducing yourself, how you're greeting them, how you're saying goodbye, showing that you care. Let that be on their terms. It's really important that we do what we can to try to read body language also, and just know it's appropriate. Also, just being mindful that sometimes the kid might want to sit on our lap if they're younger, and just being mindful of that, because that really probably isn't appropriate as well. If they're not related to you, and they want to sit on your lap, you know, having them sit next to you. So inviting them to say, why don't you sit over here? You might even put your arm on their shoulder as a way to offer appropriate and healthy touch, because sometimes kids could be craving that. But we just want to make sure that we're just setting appropriate boundaries, making responsible choices in this area. And again, remember that something that could be so innocent to you because of your relationship with that child and their family is, again, like it's familial, but somebody who is not known might see it and be uncomfortable with it and might report it. And so again, how can you reduce the risk, follow the guidelines to protect the child and youth, and also yourself? So this next slide, Richard Hammer is he is a well-known lawyer, attorney. He's Christian. He does a lot of work with churches on their registered child and youth worker policies. And this slide just kind of shows what he suggests that churches should do. So a written application, we have. Personal interview, we do personal interviews. Institutional references. So we don't do institutional references, we just do personal references. So just being mindful of that, though it's always good to get those if the person is willing to offer those up. A 6-month affiliation role, we have that, and the 2x2 adult role, which we have that. So again, this slide is just to kind of show us that things that we do in Community of Christ to help with our policies, with reducing the risk, are also what experts in the field also promote as well. So it's important to be mindful of that. So we're just going to pause for a moment of blessing. There's going to be a few times throughout the training that we pause for some special moments. Maybe it's a blessing, maybe it's a joke. And these moments are actually added to make sure that you are watching the full video. So it's important that you pay attention to these moments and take notes, because they may show up on the quiz. And so again, this kind of helps us to make sure that you are doing what you need to do in watching the entire video. So let's have a moment of blessing from Doctrine and Covenants 161 4a and b here in the middle of our training. Do not neglect the smallest among you, for even the least of these are treasures in God's sight. Receive the giftedness and energy of children and youth, listening to understand their questions and their wisdom. Respond to their need to be loved and nurtured as they grow. Be mindful of the changing of life's seasons, of the passage from the springtime of childhood and youth to the winter years of life. Embrace the blessing of your many differences. Be tender and caring. Be reminded once again that the gifts of all are necessary in the order that divine purposes may be accomplished. And with that, we have now completed the first section of our training, and we'll prepare to go to the next. Okay, so now for our next section on what is abuse. So this is, again, that section that could become a little hard for people, and that's just something we want to be pastorally aware of as well. So abuse is when there's the inflicting of harm or the failing to act to prevent harm to a young person. It may occur immediately or through accumulation over time. Could be in a family, an institution, or a community setting. It could be by those who know them. More rarely, it's by strangers. So usually abuse is committed by somebody who knows the child, who has a relationship with the family already. In 2015, it was estimated that 1,670 children died from abuse and neglect here in the United States. And in 2015, it also, the Children's Advocacy Center served more than 311,000 child victims of abuse as well. There are some very sobering statistics out there, which is why we need to be mindful of this kind of stuff when we are bringing ministry to children and youth in our ministry settings. So the first category of abuse is neglect. This is when the responsible adult fails to provide adequately for various needs, such as physical, emotional, educational, and medical. So for physical, that could be not having adequate food or clothing or hygiene provided for the child. Emotional could be a lack of nurturing or affection. Educational, they just don't send them to school or make it a priority or requirement that they go to school. Maybe they're keeping them home from school. That would be a form of neglect. Medical could be just a failure to make and attend medical appointments, making sure that they're, when they're not taking the medical care that they need and being seen regularly by a doctor, that would be seen as a form of medical neglect for the child. Our second category is emotional, psychological. So this includes, again, everything that's listed here, the name calling and ridicule and degrading them, maybe destroying their belongings, torturing a pet as a way to emotionally abuse them. Excessive demands or criticism or humiliation, not giving them communication that they should have. This can all occur through ignorance and poverty as a result of scapegoating. There's a high correlation, of course, with domestic violence attached to this form of abuse. So this is a form of abuse that I think that we see often in society. I know it's highlighted a lot, of course, in different movies and documentaries and TV shows and stuff like that. So also attached to emotional and psychological abuse would be abuse on social media. So this is a part that we added, especially here in our mission center, because we recognize that there's a lot of damage that can be done on social media. A lot of stuff that's good. It keeps us connected and aware of each other, and it keeps us in our lives, each other's lives. But there's also bad that we need to be aware of too. And so there's cyberbullying. and that is when the use of electronic communication to bully a person, typically by sending messages of an intimidating or threatening nature. Typically, it's rarely reported because it's still fairly new in our society, and so to recognize it is hard to do at times until maybe it's too late. So it could be bullying others. It could be that the child is being the one doing the bullying. It could be the recipient of that bullying. It could be, frankly, witnessing unhealthy arguing and insults between adults, people on social media that are in their life that they're learning from by seeing how we interact with each other on social media. With the online world, there's an easier access to pornography as well. There have been issues with youth sharing partial or completely nude personal photos of themselves with friends who then share it with other friends, and maybe they share it with their significant other, and that person, they break up and then they share it with others. Just stuff like that we need, that has become more of a pressing issue in our culture today that we need to be aware of as a form of abuse. There's also, of course, then an easier access for predators to reach children and youth without the parents knowing on social media. So it's important that, that we're aware of this form, but that we're also promoting to our, just making sure that our parents and other, guardians are aware that they need to kind of stay on top of their children's interaction on social media as well. Again, in our modern era, this is an issue. This is something that we need to be aware of. It's a reality. Again, good can happen on social media, but with everything that's good, there always seems to come something that's bad as well. And so we need to be mindful, just aware of that, and so we can respond appropriately. So the third category of abuse is physical, and that is physical aggression that is directed towards a child by an adult or peer with the intent to cause injury. So if peers are physically abusing others, it's still abuse, right? It's not just from adults towards kids, it's also from kid to kid as well. So this can be striking or bruising or choking or scalding, burning, poisoning, shaken baby syndrome, anything that could be considered physical aggression. This is also where we get to that point in our training where we mentioned earlier about how maybe a portion of this training could cause parents to confront their own disciplining style. We don't, again, support corporal punishment in Community of Christ as a form of discipline. As youth workers, we must never use it. We are never spanking a kid because of what they did wrong. And we would support that parents and other guardians look at other ways of disciplining their kids that doesn't require a physical element to that discipline process. We believe that that there are healthier ways as well. It's important to recognize that in 54 countries around the world, there is a full ban on any corporal punishment for minors. So it's important to recognize that as well, that this is something that around the world is taken seriously. And so we need to be mindful of that as well. Therefore, we also don't want necessarily, though, our youth workers to be policing, right? Parents who might choose to use spanking as a form of discipline. But this is one of those things where it's important to know in your gut what's going on and follow your gut. And if you see some kind of interaction between an adult and a kid, or a kid that just feels really wrong, and then we have a responsibility to report it as well. And we'll talk a little bit later about how we handle that. The fourth category of abuse is sexual. So that is the abuse of a child by an adolescent or an adult for sexual stimulation. Could be pressuring child to engage in sexual activity, exposure, physical contact, or the display or use of a child in pornography. Of course, the effects of this could be depression, having PTSD syndrome, venereal disease, having a knowledge of sexual acts that's for their age, it seems really inappropriate and out of the ordinary for where they're at in their life. Survivors experience drug use and alcohol use, usually abusing that in many ways. There's a higher correlation to attempted suicide tied to sexual abuse as well. So just be, again, mindful of these categories of abuse. Also, there could be increased anxiety or changes in behavior that seem erratic because of any of these as well. So just, especially sexual. So make sure that we're aware of, is the kid acting differently this time than what I know them to be? Is there something going on here that I should be, that maybe it causes me to be a little bit more aware of how they're responding to things, because they're just acting in a way that is not normal for them. So a word about children and youth: it is never our responsibility to educate them about child abuse as much as it is our responsibility to help them understand that God loves them, that we love them, that they are an important part of who we are in the fabric of community of Christ, whether we just met them for the first time or whether we've known them since they were really young. We model for them what healthy relationships should be looking like. We do that in our interactions with each other and with them and with others that are also in youth ministry. For they need to know that community of Christ is a safe place for them, that we're here to help them, nurture them as they grow. And with that, we have completed our section on abuse. At this time, it might be a good time for you to pause the video and take a break to go get to the bathroom or something else, get something to eat, whatever it might be, and then to come back and continue with the training. Let us go ahead and continue on to the next section, which is mandatory reporting. So as a registered child and youth worker, you are a mandatory reporter. Mandatory reporters are people who have regular contact with vulnerable people and are therefore legally required to ensure a report is made when abuse or neglect is observed or suspected. Guidelines are in place to help you through the process of reporting. As a mandatory reporter, you must immediately report when the following happens: when an allegation of abuse is shared or witnessed, when a child or youth shares the intention to harm themselves, when anyone shares the intention to harm a child or youth, no matter how old they are, no matter how much the person that's sharing that has done. Also, when a child or youth shares about criminal activity that has happened or the intention of it to happen, that also needs to be reported and followed up on as well. If you witness abuse, or if a child or young person discloses abuse or criminal activity to you, you need to stay alert. Don't overreact, don't panic, because a child may shut down if you do that. Make sure that you ask open-ended questions, questions that don't just cause the child to give yes or no answers, questions that cause them to think for themselves and respond in a way that's appropriate. And again, it's not your job to get to the bottom of this issue. It's your job to listen to them. And so the questions you ask really should be few, just enough to make the report, and that those who are the experts, those who we report to, they're the ones that will ask any questions really that need to be asked. We don't offer confidentiality when it comes to this as well. If a child or young person discloses abuse or criminal activity, or if you witness it, you can't just keep that to yourself. That's not something you can offer them. You should never offer that to a child or youth. It's important that you follow our guidelines and procedures for this and not share it with others who don't need to know, right? Like, this is on a need to know basis, and most people do not need to know. That's part of your responsible choice as a mandatory reporter as well. So of course, be aware that disclosures could come from the activity itself, or at home, or in their community somewhere. If abuse does happen at the activity, then the director or event leader should separate the accused abuser from the activity. Don't put them in a one-on-one environment, and really, they just probably need to be sent home, right? Like, we are not there to help police the situation. We don't need to hold on to them there so that the police can come and take them away. They need to be sent home, need to be sent away, and then those that are the authorities can find them and respond in the way that they feel they need to respond. We make sure that we provide the abuse with the comfort to the level required. And so I want to pause here for a second and just say a little bit more about this. Comfort the abused. In our loving way as people of faith and the way that we care for one another, sometimes we need to remember that we don't want to smother them in that moment. We need to be very careful about touch. If somebody just disclosed to you that they've been physically abused or sexually abused, it's probably not appropriate for you then to want to give them a hug, right? But be present, be calm, offer support that is needed, be supportive, but give them personal space. And so maybe for a while after the report has been made, maybe you're just sitting on a bench next to them or even near them at the other side. Maybe you're just telling them, I'm here for you. Let me know what you need. But make sure that what we offer is appropriate for them, is healthy for them, not just what we feel our inclination is to do in that moment. We need to respond to what is going to help them and help them continue to feel safe and loved in that environment, but with appropriate space and boundaries. So a word about confidentiality again. In cases of abuse or criminal activity, we can never offer it to a child or a youth or to anybody. As a youth worker, you are required to report abuse. You respect the child or youth, their family, and legal process by not sharing that with others. I just said that, I'm saying this again. Again, this is a need-to-know basis, and only those who need to know should be informed. If abuse of any kind is not an issue, then confidentiality should be respected if the child or youth shares a personal matter with you. So this is gonna so there are gonna be times that children and youth want to talk to you privately. They want to share information with you because in a ministry role, that is what is expected in our society, that we're safe spaces for people. But that doesn't mean that we then should go and tell a parent, hey, your child just told me that they're really struggling with math or something else, something like that. It's not our job to do that. If it's something that we feel like, we ask them, hey, does your parent know about this? Well, no, they don't know about this. Okay, maybe we're going to offer, hey, are you comfortable sharing with them? Well, not really. And it's, well, what if I'm with you? What if we share it together? Would that help? Okay, maybe. Would you like me to share that with them? Would you like me to be the person that helps you with that here? So again, so let's find avenues. If we feel like the parent should know, the legal guardian should know, we find avenues to make that work, but we never break the trust that we have with the children and youth. Otherwise, you will become ineffective in your youth ministry with them. So again, this is one of those, responsible choices, kind of evaluating, reading the situation, and knowing the best way to offer up options to respond. It's always good when we can give our children and youth options in their journey as well. We do want to also add, even though it's not children and youth, but because we are mandatory reporters, it's important that you recognize that there's another component to that, and that is abuse towards elderly and vulnerable adults. So as a mandatory reporter, you should be aware and prepared to report when abuse directed towards these populations is witnessed or suspected. This could be neglect or financial exploitation of elderly and vulnerable adults. A vulnerable adult is an adult with physical disabilities, developmental disabilities, mental illness, and or dependency on institutional services. So again, when this occurs, we are required to respond as well. So now let's talk about, okay, so you have witnessed this, it's been shared with you. How do you now respond in this situation? So let's say the child, youth, vulnerable, we have a flow chart here. So at the top of the flow chart, we have the child, youth, vulnerable adult. And they share that, or the mandatory reporter witnesses it. And if you're at a reunion or a youth camp setting, which is a lot of times where this stuff does kind of come to light, you as the mandatory reporter, as the youth worker, you're gonna share that with your event director as well. They are gonna then immediately contact either myself or Donald Welch or Kim Naton as the people who are in our various leadership roles within the Life of the Mission Center to then kind of make that report. We're then going to immediately contact local authorities. We're going to call the police, or we're going to report it to the Department of Social and Health Services. We're then going to make sure that our legal department is aware, so they have a record of it. And in most situations, we're going to let the pastor know confidentially in their role that this is happening, either with a member, that either a member of their congregation has shared that they've been abused, or we saw it happen, or if the person doing it is in their congregation, we're going to make sure they're aware. And this is so they're not blindsided. So because really they're our partner in ministry locally. And so we need to make sure that anything that happens locally in ministry for these individuals, that they're looped in on. Now, if it's in the congregational setting, it's pretty much the same thing, right? The mandatory reporter, the youth worker, is going to go to the ministry leader or pastor, who's going to contact Mission Center leadership, and we're then going to contact the authorities first, and then the Office of General Counsel. It's important that you know and understand this reporting flowchart, and if you contact me, I will be happy to send you a digital copy of just this slide specifically, so that you can keep it with you and in your resources. It is very helpful to have it as just so that we're aware, because a lot of times, a lot of your ministry experience, you probably won't have to deal with this a whole lot. And therefore, when we don't have to deal with a whole lot, which is good, but we're also then, when it does come up, we're maybe not as comfortable, or we're not as aware. And so this flowchart helps us be aware, and therefore, and the most important thing, this flowchart helps make sure that we are responding to the needs of the child, and that see that they're taken care of appropriately. This also helps us to maybe remain anonymous if possible. It doesn't always guarantee that you'll remain anonymous, but having us report it does help you in that way as well, if that's what you desire for your continued relationship with the child or family. Now, I should note that we have many youth workers, many mandatory reporters, who are actually mandatory reporters for their professional job as well. Maybe they're in the medical field, or counselor, work for a school district, whatever it might be. And so they also are mandatory reporters for them as well. And as a mandatory reporter, you do have the legal right to make the claim with the authorities yourself. But even if you do that, you need to still follow this flow chart and go through the Mission Center so that we can make record of it. It still is in the context of Community of Christ ministry. And so we still need to make sure that we partner in that. But if you are comfortable making the report on your own, please go ahead and do so. Even people that are in those areas have still asked us to make the reports, and that's fine. It depends on where your comfort level is at in that regard. Now, even if you are out in the community, you're not under the Community of Christ umbrella, maybe you're just at a park with your kids or with friends or whatever, and you see something like this happen where, something to you says, well, I should be reporting that. Or maybe it happens within other circles that you run in. You still are a mandatory reporter, so you still have an obligation to report that. Because it isn't under a Community of Christ ministry umbrella, though, you do not have a requirement to go through us. But if you need our assistance, if you would still like to follow this flowchart, we are more than happy to help you. We are more than happy to make the report for you, or to at least walk you through making it if you need that support. Our number one goal, our number one objective, is that the child or youth remain our priority, no matter what setting they are in. For whether we know them or not, they are a part of who we are. They're a part of our community. So we need to uphold that as well. Now, we also have ministries within the context of our mission center where people participate in camps that are from British Columbia because of our shared relationship at Samish Island Campground in Northwest Washington. So we have a shared experience with youth camps as well as some other retreats and events. So we just want to make sure that everybody that's staffs those ministries, that if it involves people from Canada, we have procedures in place that when we're notified at Mission Center leadership, we also work with their leadership up there to make sure that the appropriate reporting happens. And so there's local laws there also that need to be followed. And so we are just aware of that. as well. So we just want to make sure that, to assure you that that is something we have a plan for and is in our minds. Okay, so this page does have the contact information for myself, Donald Welch, and Kim Nathan, who all serve in ministry leadership roles for handling this at a jurisdictional level. We also have the emergency cell number there for our World Church legal offices. That's the Office of General Counsel. So if I would encourage you to pause this slide and to write down this information. Put all of our names, all these numbers in your phone. It really would be good for you as a youth worker to have all of our contact information should anything ever come up. We hope it doesn't, but we want to be in relationship with you, and we want to be able to respond appropriately to the needs that you have as a youth worker. So again, please enter all of these numbers in your phone before you continue. We do want to also point out that if you can't get a hold of one of us, you move on to the next person, and you move on to the next person that's listed here. And if there are three of us for some reason all don't answer, then you can call that emergency cell number. It's important that you not wait when making mandatory reporting claims. There is no timeline for when to do so. The timeline is now. The timeline is immediate. You don't have, there's not a 24-hour or 7-day or whatever window. It is now. So just be mindful of that as well. And with that, we have completed this this section, and now we prepare to go to our next one. So let us begin our next section, which is on transportation. If you are transporting a child or youth during a ministry event, then you should have 2 youth workers in the vehicle. That's still an enclosed space, so the 2x2 rule does apply. If you don't have enough staff to have 2 youth workers per vehicle, or enough cars for that matter, then consider the ways that you can reduce the risk in this situation. So one way to do that is that maybe you'll go in caravan formation where you all are leaving at the same time. You're following each other. You have a car, there's a lead car, there's a trail car, there's cars in the middle, and you know that you are always following that person. And maybe one of the kids in your car is also making sure that there's always the person behind you, just so you're always looking out for one another. And we're looking at ways to reduce the risk. So for some reason you can't have 2 youth workers in the vehicle, you need to make sure you have at least one that is 21 years of age or older, and that you are doing something that helps reduce the risk. And one of the best practices would be traveling in caravan formation to whatever it is. Maybe you're having a youth group night, but you're going bowling. And so you travel over there. Maybe a way to reduce the risk is just wherever you're going, you meet there as well, instead of having to travel. Make sure that the driver is 21 years of age or older. Just because they are a registered child youth worker assistant and have their license, they still can't transport youth during a ministry event if they're under the age of 21. They have that current driver's license, make sure it hasn't expired, and that they have proof of insurance on them. That with them always is that proof of insurance in case something were to come up. So making sure that we follow all applicable laws, that we're driving safely, making sure that we're wearing our seatbelts, that we're using hands-free driving devices, and really that means not using any devices, right? Because even hands-free devices can be distracting. So just be mindful of any distraction that can happen while you are driving with youth in the car. This could be eating. This could be maybe paying more attention to your words that you're saying to them, your conversation, than you are the road. Just what can you do to help reduce the risk? Make sure that you're using appropriate car seats and booster seats as prescribed by state law, according to the age weight of the child. So you might need to do some work and some research on that before you engage in your ministry event. Some teens that are young are still too small to sit in the front seat because of the airbag issue. So again, be mindful of that before you agree to transport. If something were to happen, it's important to recognize that your insurance is primary, and the church's insurance is secondary as well. So let's say the ministry event hasn't started yet, but the parent says, "Hey, I know you're going to this. Can my child ride with you?" Or maybe a child says, hey, can I ride with you to, the caravan huddle or the retreat or the youth night or whatever it is. Really, a best practice is that is something that is arranged between the parent and the youth worker, and that the leaders involved don't really get involved with the arranging of that, because then that kind of crosses that line to them officially doing it as part of their ministry. And if that happens, they really need to follow the 2x2 rule as much as possible. But when transporting children or youth, you make sure that you always receive permission from the parent. For long trips, check in with parents along the way. Say, hey, we just stopped to eat at McDonald's. We'll begin on the road in about 20 minutes and we have about 3 hours left to drive. Or, hey, we just stopped at a rest stop, gonna take a short break. We'll get on the road. We got about an hour and a half more to go. This is where we're at. Okay, that kind of thing. Make sure that when you reach your destination that you say, hey, we're here. We're safe and sound. We got to the church, or we got to the person's home, whatever it might be. We got to the campground. Your kids have been dropped off at camp. And the same thing when they're coming back home. Make sure that when you drive them back, you're also doing those check-in times as well. These are just some best practices that we have to help us. Make sure that you have the cell phone numbers of their parents in your phone, so you can make those texting notifications or call them if you need to. So again, look at ways to reduce the risk always, even if it's not under the official umbrella of the ministry event that's happening. Maybe it's, even though it's what happens before and after as well. We always just want to make sure that everybody's safe and sound. So I told you there was going to be a few moments where we kind of pause for something that will help us with the quiz. So again, this is one of those things that you should, even though that it's a humor moment, it's a joke, you should still be taking notes, because this is going to show up on the quiz for you as well. And so, yeah. So a Sunday school teacher asked the children just before she dismissed them to go to church, and why is it necessary to be quiet in church? And little Johnny replied, because people are sleeping. So our next section is that privacy code of conduct that I already referred to earlier. This is something that you just need to be aware of. It covers basic child and youth wear policies, as well as guidelines for overnight children and youth events, and sponsoring a child to attend a retreat or reunion event with you. So just be mindful of that. You can find the privacy code of conduct by going to www.seaofchrist.org and searching for privacy code of conduct. But also, when you complete the quiz, I'm going to send this with you as well. I'm going to send you a copy of the code of conduct after you've completed the quiz for this training course. So this is something that church leaders came up with a few years ago to help with those topics that I just addressed. One of the things that I do want to just point out here is that this code of conduct ends with this statement: it is not appropriate for staff, whether they be a registered child youth worker or an assistant, to share their intimate life experiences at children and youth events. The parents of the children are entitled to know the nature of any such conversation. Staff are reminded that they are not professional counselors. So it's important that when we are sharing at youth ministry events, that we are sharing in a way that lifts up the body. So there are things that we have happened in our personal lives that become part of our testimony. They help shape our testimony. And you need to know your audience. So there are things that I might share my personal life with high school youth that I won't share at elementary age youth events, right? There's things that that's not appropriate for me to share that might be appropriate for me to share with older youth. And there might be things from my life that's not appropriate to share at all. It's important that when we do share, that when we're sharing maybe the things that we have experienced that were harder in life, things that the youth might be experiencing, that we always kind of share the outcome as well, that we always share that transformational, what happened on the other side, how did you get through it, who helped you get through it, kind of that living by example thing. So make sure that you share kind of the whole story. And if the whole story is not healthy, then maybe we need to find other ways to relate to them than through some of those stories as well. So just be mindful of what you share and who your audience is at that time. And remember, you are not a professional counselor, unless you are. But most of us are not professional counselors. And so we need to be mindful of our job in ministry to refer, right? So that we're not, our job is to make sure that we listen, but be careful and cautious not to be counseling and giving advice if you don't know what is the professional advice there, because you're not a counselor. Making sure that, again, that's that, how can we help connect children and youth to their parents to help bridge that gap at times, so that they get the help that they need, and that recognizing that that's not always us. And it's kind of a humbling thing to come to terms with, but there are people in this world that are gifted with that and have a license to do so. And so sometimes we have to ask ourselves, how can I be the bridge instead of the destination? So we're going to look at some scenarios as well to help. Our training is almost done. We're getting there. We're going to look at some scenarios, and during this time, I will be asking you some questions, and I will pause for you to consider that, and then I'll kind of walk through maybe what might be an appropriate response. Again, this is a section to take notes on because it could show up in the quiz. So as we look at this, let's look at the first question. So let's say that you're in a Sunday school class. Maybe you're a teacher or an assistant, and a kid needs to go to the bathroom. What do you do in that moment? A young kid, somebody, let's say that they're 5, 6 years old. Okay, so let's look at that. Let's go into that a little bit more. So again, because they're young, you probably don't want to send them down the hallway to the bathroom by themselves. Maybe they don't know the layout of the building. You don't know who's out there necessarily, and so you gotta be mindful of that. But if you escort the child or youth down the hallway to the bathroom, then that leaves only one other person in the classroom. So do you have a plan for that? If you leave a youth worker alone with somebody, right? Like, is there somebody in the building that's nearby that's in charge of just monitoring, that you can be like, hey, can you come in while I step out and walk this child down? Or, hey, you're out here. Can you as a youth worker just walk them down, wait outside the bathroom, and then, whatever. So that's one option to do. But maybe the best practice is to just say, okay, back class, it's bathroom break time. You kind of take them all to the bathroom, let them do their thing, and then you all come back together as a way to reduce the risk. So that way nobody's ever alone with children or youth. You're upholding the guidelines, you're protecting yourself, you're protecting them as well. It would be a good scenario all around. Okay, let's take that bathroom conversation maybe a little step further. And let's say that you are doing an outing at a park, and one of the younger kids tells you that they need to go to the bathroom there in that public setting as well. And what might you do that might help in this situation to protect them as well as protect yourself? Okay, hopefully you've had a moment to think about that. So there's a couple different ways this scenario could play out, right? Like, maybe, if there's single stall bathrooms, like, you walk in, you can lock the door, great. Walk them to there, wait outside, they're done, escort them back to the activity. But what if it's a public restroom where with multiple stalls inside an enclosed space? In that respect, you don't really want to leave them in there by themselves, right? And so, what as I was doing this training once, one of our youth workers, one of our school counselors in the Northwest, suggested that you walk into the bathroom with them. There's people that are that are in there, and you just kind of say out loud, okay, Timmy, I'll be right here waiting for you, out loud. Just and what that does is that makes sure that everybody that's around there, everybody that's in there knows that you are looking out for that child, that you are the responsible adult for that child. So anything that maybe if there is somebody in there that is a predator that may have been seeking to do harm in that situation, they know that you're watching out for them and you have just helped protect them in that space. And you just kind of wait by the door and for them to finish, and then you guys can exit. And yeah, it'll be uncomfortable, but everybody knows that you're there waiting for that person. And so that's a way that we can reduce the risk and make sure that the youngest among us are protected. Now, obviously, there's going to be cases where your children and youth that are old enough to go on their own. So be mindful that that of where they're all at all times, and so that even if it's a high school kid that needs to go to the bathroom, just be mindful of if you haven't seen them in a while that you might need to go check up and just make sure that everything is okay and legit. So just be mindful of that as well. Okay, next scenario. Let's say that you are in a cabin at a youth camp. You're a counselor, but you're in your cabin just kind of resting or getting some work done. And a kid comes into the cabin as well. What are you going to do in that situation? Again, you are in the cabin. You're a counselor at a camp. And one of your campers had just come into that space. What do you do? So there are a few things that might be an appropriate response here. Leaving the door open is the best way to reduce a risk. That is kind of would be the standard. There's more that you can do that would be better though. So you could just step out while they are doing what they need to do, and then when they finish, you want to go back in and shut the door or whatever, or leave it open, whatever the situation is. It may be that you need to ask them, oh, I need you to step out, I'm doing something, come back in a little bit, as well, whatever it might be. But you're honoring the guidelines that says that you should not be behind closed doors with a child, for their protection, for your protection, just to make sure that everything is on the up and up. We just want to make sure that we're aware of that, because again, in those settings, it becomes especially easy to just kind of be comfortable and not think about those nuances anymore. But we need to be thinking about those nuances and prepared. So as much as possible, we're doing what we can do at all times. Also, there should always be two youth workers and counseling together in any enclosed space. And so that also helps as well. But just be mindful of that, and ways that you can reduce the risk. So if you can step out, do that, or ask them to wait. At a minimum, make sure those doors are open while you're in there as well. Just be thinking about ways, again, to reduce the risk in all situations. We're always trying to make responsible choices as we offer children and youth ministry. So at this time, I do first want to just give a note about online children and youth ministry, which is becoming more prevalent in Community of Christ. Make sure, please, that you are following all the guidelines of being a registered child and youth worker, even when it's online. This includes having at least 2 registered child and youth workers that are present and available for online ministry at all times. Okay, so again, some reminders for us that we're always following the 2x2 policy. Again, that can be 1 youth worker assistant and 1 registered youth worker. That's 21 years of age or older. It cannot be 2 youth worker assistants to cover that policy, and they should never be alone. Assistants should never be alone or offering ministry to youth that are in the same age as they are. Anybody working with youth should be a minimum of 3 years older than the youth that you're working with. That is required. We really prefer that they be 5. So there would be that good distance in age and maturity between them and the person that they're bringing ministry to. Again, one-on-one policy, making sure they're visually aware. In cases where 2x2 doesn't work, those are always seen, not necessarily heard, or in cases where they just need to be able to talk with an adult about something. No child should ever be alone with an adult behind closed doors. Always remember that. We also just want to share our Birth of All Persons statement for working with youth in our mission center, the Greater Pacific Northwest USA Mission Center. And that is that there is to be no discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity, political affiliations, religious beliefs, race, national origin, and the disability of our children and youth at our ministry events. Our children and youth ministry workers should seek to provide a safe place for all, including the use of preferred names and gender identities. The teachings at our children and youth ministry events must reflect Community of Christ identity, mission, message, and beliefs, as well as policies and statements. So obviously at this time, we cannot do a Q&A on this recorded training, but if you have any questions, again, I will have my email for you at the end, and I just would invite you to send me an email and say, hey, took the training, this is what I came up with as well. These are some questions I have. Also, when you take the quiz, that will also include a place to add any questions that you might have as well. In closing, we want to make sure that you know that as a registered child and youth worker, you should take a refresher training every 3 to 5 years so that you're current on policies and procedures. If you're not sure if it's been 3 to 5 years, you can ask us, but if you're not sure, that's probably a good sign that it's time to take one again. With that, we're going to have now a benediction for you and the work that you do. So let us go ahead and offer a prayer. Oh, Holy One, I am grateful for this disciple who has taken this training and who is preparing to serve our children and youth in a more robust way, in a way that has more wisdom and knowledge of the policies of Community of Christ and how we are doing what we can do to help protect those that we are bringing ministry to. I pray for them in their ministry that it may be fruitful and of your desire and calling in their life. I also pray for the children and youth that they are bringing ministry to. May they be open and receptive, and may they know that they are loved by God, by all of us, by this faith community. Amen. So as a standing for a statement that we have with all of our trainings, the privilege of being a youth worker brings responsibilities, and those responsibilities can be an expression of the peace and justice principles that we try to live by, to live out Christ's mission, our mission. Okay, here's the closing slide. To receive the link to the training quiz or for further questions, you can contact me at that email address there below. That's slangdon, LANGDON, at seaofchrist-gpnw.org. The quiz will also be occasionally provided via email communications to all of our members and friends that sign up to receive that in the Greater Pacific Northwest USA Mission Center. We will also be posting it online at our website as well, and that website is below. So the link to this quiz as well as to this training will also be found in those spaces or on our social media pages too. You can find our YouTube page, which includes, if you search for our YouTube page, you will find this training there. So hopefully you're already there. And in the description section, we'll have a link to the quiz as well. With that, we thank you for taking this training, and may many blessings be experienced because you are responding to the call. Have a good day.